So, as Paul mentioned, James Saunders, founder and owner of New England Barrel Company. The reason we're here today is I'm also a client of Bardstown Bourbon Co. So we can get into the full background of the company, my background, talk about the industry. But really, what we're doing, you guys have the welcome cocktail. You have 6 samples in front of you as well. And what we're doing is we're going through a tasting of our distillate. So we started contract distilling with Bardstown Bourbon Company last year. So we have distillate for 23, distillate for 24. And then I have the pull some samples that are a bit older as well. We've tasted new make this week. Now it's time to taste some younger bourbon that's in the process of maturing. Started the company almost 4 years ago. Ended up acquiring another company with some partners called Cask and Crew out of Rochester, New York, which allowed me to assume the production contract that they had with Bardstown Bourbon Company. Okay, my first call a week after starting the company was to Bardstown Bourbon Company to figure out how to contract distill. So I'd say let's start with the rye. Going left to right, you have the youngest to the oldest. A lot on your left is now 7 months old. Right? So again, this is how I begin the process of figuring out exactly where these barrels are heading, right? If you guys had to take a look at my notes, you would think I'm absolutely crazy, but it's what I do to really, this is my first time tasting these two since May. And we're now in 8 states, fastest growing craft brand across all spirits categories in New England.
Why doesn't anyone seem to play in that rye space? Because I think yesterday, we had a 51-49, and that was that's not something you would normally see very frequently.
Yeah.
So why is that?
So if you're talking about craft brands, 95.5 really easy to get. There's a ton of it out there, all ages. Really easy to get. But if you're talking about actual distilleries, right? The odds are pretty good. You're not talking about 95.5 rye, especially if that distillery's here in Kentucky, right? You're talking about much lower, barely legal rye, maybe 65%, right? But those distilleries aren't telling you what magical is, right? So we just assume because we're inundated with 95.5 from a craft standpoint that that's what everyone's doing, but the big boys aren't. Because one of the biggest reasons is this, right? This gets into so these fermentation tanks. If you're making a 95.5 rye, right, just purely because of fermentation and the reaction of the yeast, you're going to have a distillation yield that is 20 to 30% less automatically, right? So same level of grain, but because of the reaction, you can't fill those tanks as much as you can with a lower rye bourbon or a lower rye. So a barely legal rye would get you to a yield that is closer to what you would get in terms of bourbon, which makes it more economically viable for you to create a rye, right? Versus that tank being at 40% capacity, and you're going to bottle or you're going to barrel 40% less barrels, right? That's 95.5 rye, 100% rye, super high rye ryes are really expensive to make. The way I explain rye versus bourbon, I view picture we're at an ice cream parlor, right? Rye is that vanilla that can just take so well to everything, right? That's one of the reasons why rye-based cocktails, in my opinion, are significantly easier to make because you have more leeway. You have more room for error with rye than you do with bourbon, right? Because if you screw up a cocktail with bourbon, you screw it up, right? Rye, you can make some mistakes and the rye will still fix it, right? I drink a lot of I taste a lot of young bourbon. It's the very rare barrel that shines through at 2.5-3 years. And that's what I look for. I look for those super outliers when it comes to blending something that's typically between 3.5 and 4 years old. But I'd say that barrel is 1 out of 20, right? Which is one of the reasons why I'm tasting through the bowl of bourbon in order to create a bourbon. rye, like for a first blend or first batch, I tasted through a ton of rye because I'm like, this one has to be on point. You need to be able to hit it hard. And I think we're at a tipping point in terms of whiskey drinkers, American whiskey drinkers, where rye is going to be the next thing that happens. Like local community, black community, whiskey community, probably like the three biggest communities I'm a part of. And one of the cool things about the whiskey community, and one of the things that didn't exist when I got into the game, was this.
Yeah.